When a brilliant young engineer creates a groundbreaking energy device, he thinks he's finally achieved his dreams, until his ruthless boss steals the invention, taking all the credit and leaving him in the shadows. Determined to reclaim what's rightfully his, he sets out on a calculated path of revenge, planting flaws in the product, collecting damning evidence, and exposing the truth to the world. But as his plan unfolds and his enemy falls, a shocking revelation emerges: his invention might not have been entirely his to begin with. Uncovering a buried scandal that goes deeper than he ever imagined, he must make a choice: protect his hard-earned success or risk it all to give credit where it's long overdue. In a world driven by ambition and betrayal, justice comes with a price. The lab was quiet, except for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional clink of metal against glass. It was late, probably nearing midnight, but I had lost track of time hours ago. I always did when I was in the zone. My hands moved instinctively, twisting wires, soldering circuits, tweaking the final pieces of the puzzle. And tonight, everything was coming together. I held my breath as I connected the last wire, my heart pounding as I pressed the small power button on the side of the sleek, compact device I'd spent the past 6 months creating. A faint green light flickered on, steady and bright. I plugged in my phone, watching as the battery icon jumped from 12% to 90% in a matter of seconds. It worked. It actually worked. A grin spread across my face as the reality of what I'd just accomplished sank in. This wasn't just some minor improvement on existing tech, this was a breakthrough. A portable energy module that could charge a device in minutes. It was small enough to fit in your pocket, yet powerful enough to run an electric car. I leaned back in my chair, wiping the sweat from my brow. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Years of study, endless hours of trial and error, and now it was all worth it. I didn't just have an invention, I had a game changer. Something that could disrupt entire industries. Something that could put my name on the map. The thought made me giddy. I imagined standing on a stage at a tech conference, holding the module up for the world to see. Flashbulbs popping, journalists scribbling notes, my name in bold headlines. Innovation at its finest, the genius behind the portable energy revolution. But before any of that could happen, I needed to present it to my company. That was the deal, after all. I worked for Enertech, one of the biggest players in the tech industry. Anything I developed in their labs automatically became their intellectual property. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but as a fresh college graduate, I'd needed the job. And honestly, I didn't mind. I figured if I proved myself, they'd reward me accordingly. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized how naive I'd been. The quarterly innovation meeting was held in the sleek, glass-walled conference room on the top floor of the Enertech building. I was nervous as hell, clutching my prototype in one hand and a stack of neatly printed presentation slides in the other. I'd spent hours preparing, rehearsing every word, anticipating every question. This was my moment to shine. When I walked in, the room was already full. Executives in tailored suits, senior engineers with their arms crossed, and, at the head of the table, Raymond Carter. My boss. Carter was the kind of man who commanded attention without even trying. Everything about him screamed success: the expensive watch on his wrist, the perfectly styled hair, the way he leaned back in his chair with an air of smug confidence. He had a reputation for being ruthless, but he was also brilliant. I'd once admired him, though that admiration had quickly soured after a few months of working under his thumb. He barely looked up as I entered, muttering something about how we needed to keep this quick. My heart sank, but I pressed on. I wasn't about to let his indifference ruin my big moment. I began my presentation, explaining the science behind the energy module, the countless problems it could solve, the limitless potential for profit. As I spoke, I noticed the shift in the room. The executives were no longer scrolling through their phones or staring out the window. They were leaning forward, nodding, exchanging glances. Even Carter had straightened up, his piercing eyes fixed on the prototype I'd set on the table. When I finished, the room erupted into applause. I'd done it. They were impressed. Carter stood, clapping slowly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "This," he said, picking up the device and turning it over in his hands, "is a game changer." For the first time in months, I felt a surge of pride. Validation. Maybe even respect. Carter asked a few pointed questions about the production timeline, potential obstacles, but his tone was different now. Less dismissive. Almost admiring. "I think we've got something special here," he said, setting the module down and addressing the room. "Let's fast-track this. I want it ready for market by the end of the quarter." The executives nodded in agreement, and just like that, the meeting was over. Carter gave me a firm pat on the back as we left the room. "Good work," he said. "This is exactly the kind of thing we need around here." I floated out of that conference room, high on adrenaline. For the first time since I'd started at Enertech, I felt like I belonged. Like I'd proven myself. I went back to the lab, ready to dive into the next phase of development. Then, a week later, everything fell apart. It started with an email. A press release from Enertech, announcing the launch of a revolutionary new product. My heart leapt as I opened the attachment, eager to see the first official mention of my energy module. But as I read the document, my excitement turned to confusion. Then anger. The press release described the module in detail, even included photos of the prototype I'd built. But it didn't mention me. Not once. Instead, it credited the invention to the visionary leadership of Raymond Carter. There was even a quote from him about how this innovation represented years of strategic planning and bold ambition. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with rage. This couldn't be real. There had to be some kind of mistake. I marched straight to Carter's office, barging in without knocking. He didn't even look surprised to see me. In fact, he seemed amused, lounging in his leather chair with that infuriating smirk. "Something on your mind, kid?" he asked, spinning a gold pen between his fingers. "You know damn well what's on my mind," I snapped, slamming the press release on his desk. "This is my invention. My work. You had no right." He held up a hand, cutting me off. "Let me stop you right there," he said, his tone calm but laced with condescension. "You work for Enertech. That means anything you create here belongs to the company. And last time I checked, I am the company." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't fair," I said, my voice shaking. "You didn't do anything. You didn't spend months working on this. You didn't." "Fair." Carter leaned forward, his eyes cold and sharp. "Let me give you some advice, kid. The world doesn't care about fair. It cares about results. And if you're smart, you'll drop this and move on. Otherwise, you're just going to make life harder for yourself." He leaned back again, spinning his pen as if the conversation was already over. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a product launch to prepare for." I left his office in a daze, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right about one thing: the company owned my invention. Legally, there was nothing I could do. But the injustice of it all burned in my chest. I'd poured my heart and soul into that project, only to have it ripped away by a man who didn't even know how it worked. I thought about quitting, but something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the quiet, simmering rage that had taken root inside me. Carter thought he'd won, thought he could steal from me without consequences. He was wrong. The days following the press release were a blur of anger, frustration, and simmering hatred. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of my stolen work. Enertech plastered my prototype all over their website and social media, calling it the future of portable energy. Carter's smug face was in every photo, holding the device as if he'd built it himself. Investors were lining up, customers were already pre-ordering, and the company's stock price shot through the roof. Every morning, I walked into the office and forced myself to sit through meetings where Carter would wax poetic about the product's groundbreaking design and unparalleled functionality, while everyone nodded along, none the wiser. I could barely contain my disgust, but I kept my mouth shut. If there was one thing I knew about revenge, it was that you needed to be patient. I threw myself into the next phase of the project, using my position on the development team to stay close to the product. While Carter was busy basking in the glory, I was in the trenches, overseeing every detail of the production process. But I wasn't just working. I was planning. I'd always believed in the power of precision, whether it was in my engineering or my life. If I was going to take Carter down, I couldn't afford any mistakes. So I started gathering evidence. Quietly, carefully, without drawing attention to myself. First, I went through my emails, printing every message that proved I was the original creator of the energy module. I had drafts of my early designs, updates I'd sent to the team, and even a few replies from Carter himself, where he barely acknowledged my progress. I backed everything up on an external hard drive and hid it in a safe place. Next, I reviewed the lab security footage. It was standard protocol for the lab to have cameras running 24/7, and I knew exactly when I'd been working on the prototype, often late at night, long after everyone else had gone home. I submitted a formal request for the footage under the guise of reviewing past tests for quality assurance. The IT department didn't question it, they handed over the files without a second thought. When I watched the footage, my stomach churned. There I was, hunched over my workbench, soldering, testing, tweaking. Alone. 4 hours. It was undeniable proof that I was the one who'd built the device. Not Carter. Not anyone else. Me. But even with all the evidence I was collecting, I knew it wasn't enough. Carter was untouchable. He had the company's legal team wrapped around his finger, and no judge was going to side with a low-level engineer over a multi-million-dollar corporation. If I wanted justice, I'd have to hit him where it hurt. His reputation. And I knew exactly how to do it. The flaw I planted in the production version of the device was subtle. So subtle that no one on the team caught it during testing. It was a small design tweak, one that wouldn't show up until the device was used under specific conditions. Instead of charging devices at full speed, the energy module would start to lag after repeated use. The more you used it, the slower it got. Eventually, it would become so inconsistent that it wouldn't charge at all. To the untrained eye, it would look like a manufacturing defect. Customers would assume it was a faulty batch. But I knew better. The problem wasn't with the manufacturing, it was baked into the design. And I was the only one who could fix it. I didn't feel guilty about sabotaging my own invention. The way I saw it, Carter had already stolen it from me. If he wanted to sell a broken product to the world, that was on him. I was just giving him enough rope to hang himself. The real work began when the first batch of devices rolled off the assembly line. Enertech wasted no time shipping them out to early adopters and influencers, eager to generate buzz before the official launch. The reviews started pouring in almost immediately, and at first, they were glowing. Customers raved about the sleek design, the speed of the initial charge, the convenience. Enertech's marketing team was in overdrive, flooding social media with hashtags and testimonials. Carter was riding high. He strutted around the office like a king, basking in the praise, throwing around phrases like industry revolution and disruptive innovation. He even gave me a passing nod in one meeting, saying, "Great work on this, team." As if my name wasn't the one that should have been on the patent. But then the complaints started trickling in. At first, it was just a few isolated cases. Customers posting on forums, wondering why their chargers weren't performing as well after a few weeks of use. The marketing team dismissed it as user error, saying people probably weren't following the instructions. But as the days went on, the trickle turned into a flood. Tech bloggers started picking up the story. One particularly scathing review called the device a glorified paperweight and accused EnerTech of rushing an untested product to market. Carter tried to spin it, issuing a press statement about unforeseen challenges with scaling production, but it wasn't enough. The damage was done. Investors started asking questions. Retailers threatened to pull the product from their shelves. Customers demanded refunds. And Carter, for all his bluster and charm, was starting to crack under the pressure. I stayed quiet through it all, playing the role of the loyal employee. I even pretended to help troubleshoot the issue, suggesting pointless fixes that wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Carter grew increasingly desperate, calling emergency meetings, snapping at anyone who dared to bring him bad news. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked vulnerable. And I wasn't done yet. The final piece of my plan came into play when I reached out to a journalist from a major tech publication. I used an anonymous email to tip him off, attaching some of the evidence I'd collected, the security footage, the emails, the timestamps on my original designs. I told him the real story behind the energy module, how Carter had stolen it, how the flaws were a direct result of his greed and incompetence. It didn't take long for the story to blow up. Within hours of the article going live, EnerTech was in full-blown crisis mode. Headlines like EnerTech CEO accused of stealing invention and revolutionary product fails to deliver dominated the news cycle. Social media exploded with outrage, customers posting videos of their malfunctioning devices, demanding accountability. Carter called another emergency meeting, his face pale and drawn. He tried to rally the team, insisting they could turn this around, but the writing was on the wall. The board of directors was furious, the investors were pulling out, and the public had turned against him. I sat in the back of the room, watching as the man who'd stolen everything from me slowly unraveled. It was a satisfying sight. But I wasn't done yet. Carter's descent was swift, and I watched it unfold with cold satisfaction. The scandal surrounding the energy module spiraled out of control. Every tech outlet worth its salt ran stories dissecting the product's failure, its rushed rollout, and, of course, the accusations against Carter. The journalist I'd tipped off had done a brilliant job connecting the dots, portraying Carter as a fraudulent CEO who took credit for work that wasn't his and pushed a defective product to market just to line his pockets. And the media ate it up. The company's board of directors, which had once treated Carter like the golden goose, was now panicking. The energy module had been EnerTech's flagship product for the year, the centerpiece of their growth strategy. With it imploding in spectacular fashion, the company's stock was tanking. Investors were furious, and rumors of lawsuits from angry customers were spreading like wildfire. In the middle of all this chaos, Carter was still clinging to the remnants of his ego. He doubled down, issuing a statement insisting that the flaws in the product were minor and easily fixable. He called the accusations about stealing my work baseless and an attack on the innovative spirit of EnerTech. But no one was buying it. The tipping point came when a second journalist, digging deeper into the story, got hold of an internal document from the company. It was one of the project's earliest reports, one that I'd written, clearly laying out the concept, design, and development timeline of the energy module. My name was on every page. And Carter's? Nowhere to be found. That was when the floodgates opened. EnerTech's HR department launched an internal investigation to determine whether Carter had violated company policy by taking credit for my work. The board hired an independent auditor to evaluate the project's failures and how much Carter had known about the product's design flaws before launch. Carter was summoned to a series of grueling closed-door meetings with the board, where I imagined he was scrambling to explain away the evidence piling up against him. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and played my part. I pretended to be as blindsided as everyone else by the controversy. In meetings, I nodded along with the discussions about damage control, offered vague comments about how we could work together to rebuild trust, and avoided drawing too much attention to myself. But behind the scenes, I was preparing for the next phase of my plan. I didn't just want to watch Carter fall. I wanted to rise in his place. For months, I'd been the invisible engineer, toiling away in the background while Carter stood in the spotlight. Now, I was ready to step forward. But I knew I had to play it smart. If I came across as vindictive or opportunistic, it could backfire. I needed to position myself as the underdog, the wronged inventor who only wanted to see the truth come to light. It started with a quiet conversation with one of the senior engineers, a man named Paul who'd been at the company for over a decade. Paul was well liked and respected, and he had no love for Carter. During a lunch break, I casually mentioned how disheartened I was by everything that was happening. I just wanted to build something that could make a difference, I said, my voice heavy with fake sincerity. I never wanted it to turn into this. Paul nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's a shame what happened, he said. People like Carter, they think they can get away with anything. But you know, I've seen how hard you've worked on this. A lot of people have. I let his words hang in the air for a moment before responding. I appreciate that, I said. I just hope the truth comes out. Not for me, but for the sake of the company. Enertech deserves better. It was a subtle move, planting the seed of my narrative without explicitly asking for anything. And it worked. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged me before started stopping by my desk, offering words of support or asking for my opinion on projects. Word was spreading, and for the first time, people were starting to see me as more than just another faceless engineer. The real breakthrough came when the board of directors made their move. After weeks of mounting pressure, they announced that Carter would be stepping down as CEO, to focus on his personal and professional growth. It was a thinly veiled firing, but they tried to spin it as amicable. Carter's resignation letter was full of hollow platitudes about leaving the company in capable hands and continuing to support Enertech's mission. In reality, he was leaving in disgrace. His reputation in the tech world was shattered, and he'd likely never hold a leadership position again. The sight of him packing up his office, his usual smugness replaced by a sullen, defeated expression, was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But I wasn't done yet. With Carter out of the picture, the board was desperate to stabilize the company's image. They needed someone to step forward, to represent the future of Enertech. And I made sure they saw me as that person. I waited a few days before requesting a meeting with the head of R&D and one of the board members. I came prepared, bringing along a polished presentation that outlined a plan for salvaging the energy module project. My pitch was simple: acknowledge the flaws, recall the defective units, and relaunch the product under my leadership. I know this device has the potential to succeed, I told them, my tone measured and confident. I built it. I understand the problem, and I know how to fix it. The public doesn't trust the company right now, but if we're transparent about the mistakes and show them that we're committed to making things right, we can turn this around. It was a bold move, but it paid off. The board was impressed, not just with my technical expertise but with my composure under pressure. They saw me as the anti-Carter, humble, hardworking, and genuine. Within a week, I was promoted to lead engineer on the project, with a team of my own and direct access to the board. The media caught wind of the shakeup, and suddenly, I was in the spotlight. Articles painted me as the unsung hero of the energy module saga, the brilliant young inventor who had been overshadowed by a corrupt CEO. I gave a few carefully worded interviews, emphasizing my commitment to innovation and integrity while subtly distancing myself from Carter's failures. It wasn't long before I was being invited to speak at conferences, to share my story with audiences eager to hear about the triumph of the little guy over corporate greed. I accepted every invitation, not just for the exposure but because I wanted everyone to know the truth. Carter had tried to erase me, to steal my work and my future. But now, the world knew who I was. And I wasn't finished building my legacy. The months following Carter's ousting were nothing short of a whirlwind. The energy module, now branded as the Phoenix Charger, in a carefully crafted rebranding effort, was back on the market and performing flawlessly. Under my leadership, the relaunch had been a massive success. Customers praised its reliability, investors returned with renewed confidence, and Enerteka's reputation was slowly rebuilding. I'd become the face of the company's redemption, a symbol of resilience and innovation. Magazine covers, tech conferences, interviews. I was everywhere. My face was synonymous with triumph, my story celebrated as a modern-day David versus Goliath. And for a while, I let myself bask in the glory. But success has a way of attracting shadows, and mine came in the form of a late-night email. It arrived in my inbox with no subject line, sent from a burner email address. The message was short: "We both know the Phoenix Charger didn't just happen overnight. Let's talk." Attached was a single file, a scanned copy of an old design sketch for the energy module. My heart stopped when I opened it. The sketch was almost identical to the one I'd presented in my original prototype, but it wasn't mine. The handwriting wasn't mine. The date on the page was nearly a year before I'd even been hired at Enertech. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Could it be a fake? A hoax? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The details were too precise, too similar to my design. Someone else had worked on this before me. Someone who had been erased, just like I almost had. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of doubt settle on my shoulders. Was I really the brilliant inventor everyone thought I was? Or had I unknowingly built on someone else's work? The thought made me sick. I needed answers. The next day, I dug into the company archives, using my new position to access confidential files. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Buried deep in the records was a name I'd never heard before: Dr. Amelia Cross. She'd been a senior engineer at Enertech 5 years ago, assigned to a team researching portable energy solutions. According to the files, she'd proposed a prototype nearly identical to my energy module, but her project had been shelved due to budget constraints. There was no explanation as to why her work had never been revisited, or why her name had seemingly vanished from company history. The deeper I dug, the more unsettling the story became. Amelia had been quietly let go shortly after her project was cancelled. No fanfare, no announcement. And the patents for her work? Transferred to Enertech under the terms of her exit agreement. The company owned her designs, but they'd buried them. Until now. I leaned back in my chair, the realization hitting me like a freight train. The energy module hadn't been stolen once, it had been stolen twice. First from Amelia, and then from me. And now I was the one standing in the spotlight, reaping the rewards. The burner email suddenly made sense. Someone out there, maybe Amelia herself, maybe someone close to her, knew the truth. And they were waiting for me to do something about it. I couldn't sleep that night. The revelation gnawed at me, tearing through the pride I'd felt in my accomplishments. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, it wasn't entirely mine. I was living someone else's dream, someone who'd been discarded and forgotten. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to find Amelia. It wasn't hard. A few online searches revealed that she was now working as a freelance consultant, far removed from the world of high-stakes tech companies. I reached out to her under the pretense of wanting to collaborate on future projects. To my surprise, she agreed to meet. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. She was older than I expected, with streaks of gray in her hair and tired eyes that hinted at battles long fought and lost. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said, her voice calm but guarded. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I found your work," I said. "Your designs. They're the foundation of the Phoenix Charger, aren't they?" She took a slow sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim of her cup. "You tell me," she said. "You're the genius everyone's talking about." Her words stung, but I deserved it. "I didn't know," I said quietly. "When I was developing the prototype, no one told me about you. About your work. They erased you." Amelia's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Of course they did. That's how Enertech operates. They use you until you're no longer convenient, then they toss you aside. I was just another casualty." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you go public?" She shrugged. "I tried. But when you're up against a billion-dollar corporation with a team of lawyers, you don't stand a chance. They made sure I signed away everything before I left. And after a while, I realized it wasn't worth destroying myself over." Her words hung heavy in the air. I thought about everything I'd gone through to expose Carter, the toll it had taken on me. Amelia had been through the same thing, only she hadn't had the luxury of fighting back. She'd been crushed before she even had the chance. But now, I had the chance. And I wasn't going to waste it. The next week was a blur of preparation. I knew that exposing the truth about Amelia would mean risking everything I'd built. My reputation, my position at Enertech, even the financial success of the Phoenix Charger, it could all come crashing down. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. I contacted the same journalist who'd helped me take down Carter, providing him with everything I'd uncovered about Amelia's work. I insisted that the story focus on her, her brilliance, her contributions, and the injustice she'd faced. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about giving credit where it was long overdue. When the article went live, it sent shockwaves through the tech world. Headlines screamed, "Enertech's dirty secret, the woman behind the Phoenix Charger." The piece detailed how Amelia's work had been buried, how the company had profited from her ideas without acknowledging her. It painted a damning picture of Enertech's culture, one that prioritized profit over people. The backlash was immediate. Customers, investors, and even employees demanded accountability. Enertech scrambled to control the narrative, issuing a statement apologizing for their oversight and pledging to make amends. They offered Amelia a hefty settlement and a public acknowledgement of her contributions. As for me, the board wasn't thrilled with my role in the scandal, but they couldn't fire me without causing more damage. I'd become too visible, too integral to the company's public image. So they let me stay, for now. But I knew my time at Enertech was limited. The company was rotting from the inside, and I didn't want to be part of it anymore. A few weeks later, I handed in my resignation. Before I left, I met with Amelia one last time. She was cautious, understandably so, but there was a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "You could have stayed quiet." I shrugged. It was the right thing to do. She smiled faintly. "That's rare in this business. Now, I'm starting over." I used my share of the profits from the Phoenix Charger to launch my own startup, a small, independent company dedicated to ethical innovation. No shortcuts. No stolen ideas. Just good people building good things. As for Enertech, they're still struggling to recover from the fallout. Carter's scandal was bad enough, but the Amelia story did permanent damage. The board replaced half its leadership, but the trust they lost can't be rebuilt overnight. Sometimes, I wonder if I made the right choice. I gave up fame, fortune, and power to do what I thought was right. But then I think of Amelia, and the look on her face when she finally got the recognition she deserved. And I know I wouldn't change a thing.